forgiveness and whose hands...
Live from the campus of Michigan State University in East Lansing, the third presidential debate. Now reporting from ABC News World Headquarters, Peter Jennings.
Good evening and welcome. This is the last debate of the presidential season. It's important to all three of the candidates, particularly so because so much of the country has been tuned in to see these three men, and this is surely the last opportunity for them to have such a large audience paying such close attention. It's not our intention to prejudge the debate by any means, but if you listen to President Bush's own campaign team, whatever tactics they think he should use tonight, this is as good a chance as he's going to have in these last 2 weeks to convince the voters that he deserves a second term, at least as good a chance with this large an audience. When the debate is over, we'll ask some of the undecided voters from our focus group if they have finally made up their minds. It is getting late. Tonight's moderator, Jim Lehrer, will explain the format. A little later on, by the way, he will be joined by 3 journalists to ask questions, but that's him alone on the stage tonight. The Bush people apparently prefer the way it is set up tonight. They were not particularly happy with the audience participation last Thursday. Governor Clinton, who you may have heard is on the news today, is ahead in the race by virtually every public measurement. Spent the weekend telling his supporters they should not be overconfident. Here's Jim Lehrer.
Good evening. Welcome to this third and final debate among the 3 major candidates for President of the United States. Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic nominee. President George Bush, the Republican nominee. And independent candidate Ross Perot. I am Jim Lehrer of the McNeil-Lehrer NewsHour on PBS. I will be the moderator for this debate, which is being sponsored by the Commission on Presidential Debates. It will be 90 minutes long. It is happening before an audience on the campus of Michigan State University in East Lansing. The format was conceived by and agreed to by representatives of the Bush and Clinton campaigns, and it is somewhat different than those used in the earlier debates. I will ask questions for the first half under rules that permit follow-ups. A panel of 3 other journalists will ask questions in the second half under rules that do not. As always, each candidate will have 2 minutes, up to 2 minutes, to make a closing statement. The order of those, as well as that for the formal questioning, were all determined by a drawing. Gentlemen, again, welcome, and again, good evening. It seems from what some of those voters said at your Richmond debate, and from polling and other data, that each of you, fairly or not, faces serious voter concerns about the underlying credibility and believability of what each of you says you would do as president in the next 4 years. Governor Clinton, in accordance with the draw, those concerns about you are first. You are promising to create jobs, reduce the deficit, reform the health care system, rebuild the infrastructure, guarantee college education for everyone who is qualified, among many other things, all with financial pain only for the very rich. Some people are having trouble, apparently, believing that is possible. Should they have that concern?
No. There are many people who believe that the only way we can get this country turned around is to tax the middle class more and punish them more. But the truth is that middle-class Americans are basically the only group of Americans who have been taxed more in the 1980s and during the last 12 years, even though their incomes have gone down. The wealthiest Americans have been taxed much less, even though their incomes have gone up. Middle-class people will have their fair share of changing to do and many challenges to face, including the challenge of becoming constantly re-educated. But my plan is a departure from trickle-down economics, just cutting taxes on the wealthiest Americans and getting out of the way. It's also a departure from tax and spend economics, because you can't tax and divide an economy that isn't growing. I propose an American version of what works in other countries. I think we can do it better. Invest and grow. I believe we can increase investment and reduce the deficit at the same time if we not only ask the wealthiest Americans and foreign corporations to pay their fair share, We also provide over $100 billion in tax relief in terms of incentives for new plants, new small businesses, new technologies, new housing, and for middle-class families. And we have $140 billion of spending cuts. Invest and grow. Raise some more money. Spend the money on tax incentives to have growth in the private sector. Take the money from the defense cuts and reinvest it in new transportation and communications and environmental cleanup systems. This will work. On this, as on so many other issues, I have a fundamental difference from the present administration. I don't believe trickle-down economics will work. Unemployment is up. Most people are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago. I think we can do better if we have the courage to change.
Mr. President, a response.
I have 1 minute, just the ground rules here.
Well, yeah, roughly 1 minute. We can loosen that up a little bit.
Well,
go ahead.
He doesn't like trickle-down government, but I think he's talking about the Reagan-Bush years where we created 15 million jobs. The rich are paying a bigger percent of the total tax burden, and what I don't like is trickle-down government. And therein, I think Governor Clinton keeps talking about trickle-down, and he's still talking about spending more and taxing more. Government, he says, invest government, grow government. Government doesn't create jobs. If they do, they're make-work jobs. It's the private sector that creates jobs. And yes, we've got too many taxes on the American people, and we're spending too much. And that's why I want to get the deficit down by controlling the growth of mandatory spending. It won't be painless. I think Mr. Perot put his finger on something there. It won't be painless, but we've got to get the job done. But not by raising taxes. Mr. and Mrs. America, when you hear him say, we're going to tax only the rich, watch your wallet, because his figures don't add up, and he's going to sack it right to the middle-class taxpayer and lower if he's going to pay for all the spending programs he proposed. So we have a big difference on this trickle-down theory. I do not want any more trickle-down government. It's gotten too big. I want to do something about that.
Mr. Perot, what do you think of the governor's approach, what he just laid out?
The basic problem with it doesn't balance the budget. If you forecast it out, you still have a significant deficit under each of their plans, as I understand them. Our challenge is to stop the financial bleeding. If you take a patient into the hospital that's bleeding arterially, step one is to stop the bleeding. And we are bleeding arterially. There's only one way out of this, and that is to stop the deterioration of our job base, to have a growing, expanding job base, to give us the tax base. See, balancing the budget is not nearly as difficult as paying off the $4 trillion debt and leaving our children the American dream intact. We have spent their money. We've got to pay it back. This is going to take fair, shared sacrifice. My plan balances the budget within 6 years. We didn't do it faster than that because we didn't want to disrupt the economy. We gave it off to a slow start and a fast finish to give the economy time to recover. But we faced it and we did it. And we believe it's fair, shared sacrifice. The one thing I have done is lay it squarely on the table in front of the American people. You've had a number of occasions to see in detail what the plan is, and at least you'll understand it. I think that's fundamental in our country, that you know what you're getting into.
Governor, the word pain, one of the other leadership things that's put on you is that you don't speak of pain, that you speak of all things. Nobody's going to really have to suffer under your plan. You heard what Mr. Perot has said. He said to do the things that you want to do, you can't do it by just taking the money from the rich. That's what the president says as well. How do you respond to that? If the numbers don't add up.
For one thing, let me just follow up here. I disagree with Mr. Perot that the answer is to put a 50-cent gas tax on the middle class and raise more taxes on the middle class and the working poor than on the wealthy. His own analysis says that unemployment will be slightly higher in 1995 under his plan than it is today. And as far as what Mr. Bush says, he is the person who raised taxes on the middle class after saying he wouldn't. And just this year, Mr. Bush vetoed a tax increase on the wealthy that gave middle-class tax relief. He vetoed middle-class tax relief this year. And furthermore, under this administration, spending has increased more than it has in the last 20 years, and he asked Congress to spend more money than it actually spent. Now, it's hard to outspend Congress, but he tried to for the last 3 years. So my view is the middle class is the one. They've been suffering, Jim. Now, should people pay more for Medicare if they can? Yes. Should they pay more for Social Security if they're getting more out of it than they paid in? They're upper income people? Yes. But look what's happened to the middle class. Middle class Americans are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago, and they're paying higher taxes. The tax burden on them has not gone down, it has gone up. I don't think the answer is to slow the economy down more, drive unemployment up more, and undermine the health of the private sector. The answer is to invest and grow this economy. That's what works in other countries, and that's what will work here.
As a practical matter, Mr. President, do you agree with the governor when he says that the middle class, the taxes on the middle class, do your numbers agree that the taxes on the middle class have gone up during the last...
Everybody's paying too much taxes. He refers to one tax increase. Let me remind you, it was a Democratic tax increase, and I didn't want to do it, and I went along with it. And I said, I make a mistake. If I make a mistake, I admit it. That's quite different from some. But I think that's the American way. I think everyone's paying too much. But I think this idea that you can go out and... Then he hits me for vetoing a tax bill. Yes, I did. And the American taxpayer ought to be glad they have a president to stand up to a spending Congress. We remember what it was like when we had a spending president and a spending Congress and interest rates. Who remembers that? They were at 21.5%. under Jimmy Carter. And inflation was 15. We don't want to go back to that. And so, yes, everybody's taxed too much, and I want to get the taxes down. But not by signing a tax bill that's going to raise taxes on people.
Mr. President, when you said just then that you admit your mistakes, and you looked at Governor Clinton and said, what mistake is it that you want him to admit to?
Well, the record in Arkansas. I mean, look at it. And that's what we're asking America to have? Now, look, he says Arkansas is a poor state. They are. But in almost every category, they're lagging. I'll give you an example. He talks about all the jobs he's created in 1 or 2 years. Over the last 10 years since he's been governor, there's 30% behind. 30%. They're 30% of the national average. On pay for teachers, on all these categories, Arkansas is right near the very bottom. You haven't heard me mention this before, but we're getting close now. And I think it's about time I start putting things in perspective. And I'm going to do that. It's not dirty campaigning, because he's been talking about my record for half a year here, 11 months here. And so we've got to do that. I've got to get it in perspective. What's his mistake? Admit it, that Arkansas is doing very, very badly against any standard. Environment, support for police officers, whatever it is.
Governor, is that true?
Mr. Bush's Bureau of Labor Statistics says that Arkansas ranks first in the country in the growth of new jobs this year. First.
This year.
Fourth in manufacturing jobs. Fourth in the reduction of poverty. Fourth in income increase. Over the last 10 years, we've created manufacturing jobs much more rapidly than the national average. Over the last 5 years, our income has grown more rapidly than the national average. We are second in tax burden, the second lowest tax burden in the country. We have the lowest per capita state and local spending in the country. We're low spending, low tax burden. We dramatically increased investment, and our jobs are growing. I wish America had that kind of record, and I think most people looking at us tonight would like it if we had more jobs and a lower spending burden on the government.
Mr. Perot, if you were sitting at home now and just heard this exchange about Arkansas, who would you believe?
I grew up 5 blocks from Arkansas. Let's put it in perspective. It's a beautiful state. It's a fairly rural state. It has a population less than Chicago or Los Angeles, or about the size of Dallas and Fort Worth combined. So I think probably we're making a mistake night after night after night to cast the nation's future on a unit that small.
Why is that a mistake?
It's irrelevant.
What hit? What he did as governor of Arkansas is irrelevant?
No, but you can't. I could say, that I ran a small grocery store on the corner. Therefore, I extrapolate that into the fact that I could run Walmart. That's not true.
Mr. Perot.
Governor?
I carefully picked an Arkansas company, you notice there, Governor.
All right. Governor?
Mr. Perot, with all respect, I think it is highly relevant. And I think that a $4 billion budget, the state and federal funds, is not all that small. And I think the fact that I took a state that was one of the poorest states in the country and had been for 153 years and tried my best to modernize its economy and to make the kind of changes that have generated support from people like the presidents of Apple Computer and Hewlett-Packard and some of the biggest companies in this country, 24 retired generals and